All right, friends, you know what time it is. 11 a.m. Eastern. That means stochastic college football DFS picks, live before lock, whatever you want to call it, presented by Bet365. We are ready to tackle 12 more games. We're going to talk about all the key players. We'll sprinkle in some betting takes as well, but we're going to get you ready. What's another massive Saturday, and then you can go to the Sphere and do combat sports. But we're ready to talk college football. I'm Ben Reza, of course. Matt Gajewski joins me. And the season's rolling on. We had a couple interesting games last night. Kansas State looked really sharp, but some marquee matchups. Last time we were on this show, you were deathly ill. You seem recovered. Are you, in fact, recovered?
My voice comes and goes a little bit, but it's definitely getting better. So that's positive.
All right. Well, we'll take what we can get here, friends. Chat, you guys look ready to go. You all seem healthier than me and Matt, which is a good thing.
You're sick now?
No, I'm just always perpetually sick in the head.
Oh.
You know how it is. That's what happens when you bet UMass one too many times. But we're ready to rock here. You guys know the drill. Right off the bat, hit the like button. Appreciate the support. Let's run it up. Let's get some energy in the building today. We are going to go position by position like we did last week. That worked really, really well. But we're going to start with the most important things. I always like to get your thoughts on the slate. We've got 12 games. So you're answering some questions on Twitter already about, is it a dual QB slate? How is pricing? Is it soft? Is it tight? Are you starved for value? Just your general thoughts as you start building out your lineups.
It's a tight slate for pricing outside of one game, which makes it pretty difficult for DFS. QBs are priced way up, way up. I still think it is wise to play two of them, but I at least thought about it more today, maybe going to running back in the flex in some portion of my lineups. But it's tough out there. We have a couple really owned players, and you guys will see why.
One other thing that we've got, it's week 3, so this is no surprise. We have basically run through the FCS portion of the season. A far less of them have crept into the slate, and that means just by more conference games, there are some big spreads, but it's not 40-point spreads. Is that something you noticed when you were running the Sims and whatnot, that most of these games are projecting to be at least somewhat competitive?
Yeah, there's only a couple blowout spots, which I personally like. I hate the FCS teams. It's so much extra work when they're on the slate, and it leads to so much volatility. Speaking to the Sims, I'm not super in the weeds with them, but I imagine it's extremely hard to capture all the range of outcomes when you have a 35-point spread.
Yep.
And it's not even just like in a simulation, you can capture, okay, maybe it plays 30 points this game, but you don't have any idea what the motivation is. So sometimes player personnel usage is affected by stuff like that. It's just, we don't need to spend any more time on it. It's just a complete mess. Like, please stop including FCS games. On Thursday night, it was a complete and utter disaster. And every time they're on the slate, it's just a mess.
No doubt about it. Last question before we really start drilling down into some of the games, into some of the positions. How big is the injury landscape today? Now, it's only week 3, so I would imagine it's not as bad as it's going to be in week 10. But are there crucial pieces of this slate that we're waiting on, or overall is the picture pretty clear?
It's not clear, and most of the injuries are in the afternoon window, which is a big issue. The largest is Connor Wegman for Texas A&M. Marcel Reed is the stone min, but unfortunately, you're going to have to wait to find that information out. I don't really have a strong opinion on it. If Reed starts, he would be a free square. Unfortunately, we just don't have that news, and we're not going to get it. I don't even know if we get it like leading up till kickoff. Teams in college try to be especially shady. All that stuff you've seen the 49ers do with Jordan Mason, multiply that by 100, and that's what just basically every college football team tries to do. On the other side, Eugene Wilson's questionable. That's a big one. Torrey Horton for Colorado State. He's going to play allegedly, but he's dealing with a groin injury. He's also not been great this year. I don't think it's anything that's his fault. He just has a terrible quarterback throwing him the ball. Those are the main ones I would look out for.
Wegman thing is interesting, and let's start there. I mean, let's start with quarterbacks. Let's get into it here. Clearly, I think it's pretty fair to say that you wouldn't be playing him regardless. It's more of the injury news. But who you're most likely playing is Garrett Green. He projects in terms of ownership as the overwhelming chalk on this slate. He's got a dream matchup with Pittsburgh. They've been up tempo. They've been costing me money because of Cincinnati's ineptness. That's another story for another time. Both quarterbacks in that game, can you play them together? cash viable? Let's start with Pitt, West Virginia, just as we break down quarterbacks.
Those should be your two cash quarterbacks, and it's largely just because everyone else on the on the slate is so egregiously priced. Milrose at 10K, Jackson Arnold, who's been downright bad this year, is at 9,700. Dylan Gabriel, who has negative rushing yards. I don't think that persists, but he does right now. He's at 9,900. Nussmeier is at 9,100. Will Rogers, I mean, he might be on the night slate. I don't know. I don't have this filtered right now, but you get the point. Like, so many of these players are extremely expensive for what they've shown this year. Even like John Mateer had the awesome rushing performance in their last game. He's played two easy schools. Like, what does it look like when he faces a competent team? I'm not sure that Washington is that, but the whole slate is just so expensive, especially at quarterback, which is funneling everyone to really the two values that you feel good about on the entire slate, Garrett Green and Eli Holstein. Green has excellent mobility. He was hyper efficient as a passer last year. And it's essentially been the same run out as 2023, got blasted by Penn State, turns on the efficiency and has an awesome season. Even if you think the efficiency declines, the rushing is so good with Garrett Green that I'm not sure it even matters. And Pitt is a far cry from what Penn State puts on the field. So the matchup should be very good for him. And he's super involved in the ground. So it's not really worrisome if they do take a ground and pound approach. Holstein, similarly, but almost the opposite. They run like a pure air raid. But we saw last week, even with 66 first half passing yards, so many paths to him getting there when your team's going to throw the ball 56 times a game. The biggest weakness with West Virginia is their secondary. So you want to play the matchup game. That should work in Holstein's favor. He's also not a statue. He runs a little bit, which I think you feel good about. And the reason you want to play these guys is our third value, Lenora Sellers, can't throw the ball. He has upside for 20 rush attempts. But as far as comfort in your lineups go, it's certainly better with Garrett Green and Holstein.
If you do play Sellers, I assume that's naked.
I would probably play him naked. I mean, that team stinks. I don't know. I wouldn't play Sellers in cash, even though he projects well. He projects well because everyone's so expensive.
Interesting. Yeah, that is a weird game. We'll see. We'll see what they can do. I do want to ask you, though, about the pay-up options. You mentioned that their price is ceiling. Milrose, 10K. Gabriel and Oregon, who have not looked good, right below him. Jackson Arnold, pretty good matchup. They're in Norman and whatnot. Do you have a preference if you do pay up? I mean, these guys are north of $9,500 on DraftKings. Is it Milroe? Is it a mix of them? They don't look like they're going to be too popular.
No, and I do like playing them for tournaments. I'm trying to come over on a lot of them, and it's going to be slight, but it's something I want to do. There are value options you can mix in your lineups. You don't feel good about any of them, but there are a lot that are going to be on the field today. So I'll just use, like, I don't know, Gavin Bartholomew as an example, is like a sub 4K guy. He's not my favorite. He's just the first one that came to mind. You plug a guy like him into your lineups, and then you can start getting some of these expensive quarterbacks. Yeah, you're going to be going down from, like, I don't know, Dazon Stribling or someone you actually feel good about. But the second you start doing that, you access a ceiling that I'm not sure the chalk quarterbacks are quite giving you. We've seen absolutely nuclear games from Gabriel, Milroe, and some of the expensive quarterbacks. So I do want to play them and play a more volatile lineup with some of the cheap options that you need to play in order to get those guys. Gabriel, I'll be most overweight to at 9,900. I'm still not worried about the negative rushing yards. He was awesome on the ground last year and the best fantasy asset, I think, in all of college football. Hasn't shown it yet, but I just hope, like, this offense doesn't neuter him on the ground, kind of like they neutered Bo Nix on the ground last year. Milroe has a lead upside. I can't believe they priced him at 10K. That is egregious. But the guy had a 70-some yard touchdown called back on a hold last week. Not afraid of Wisconsin's defense. Their weakness is up front, too. So that is definitely something I want to do on this slate. Sprinkle the expensive guys, try to come in overweight. Neither of them are owned. And then try to use the value and spray down there to find a lineup that might get to the top.
There are two quarterbacks to me that are in between what we've already talked about. We talked about Green and Holstein as value options. We talked about Milroe and certainly Gabriel kind of as pay-up options. Brady Cook and Bowman are in the mid-8s. You know, they're not going to be crazy popular. They're not going to be unowned. When you look at Missouri, Boston College has taken some money. That spread has dropped. We're both on the BC side, but I still think Brady Cook can be effective. And then Alan Bowman, I want to talk about that game specifically, but let's just start with those two. Do you find yourself getting to those type of lineups where it's Cook and Burden and some of these guys from Missouri, or Oklahoma State, who has a dream matchup against Tulsa's anti-defense?
I have more Bowman right now. Just being on the stream, I'm probably not going to be able to change it. It's really hard to do these things while live. But I prefer Brady Cook to Bowman. Brady Cook's actually talented. And this will be the first time I think they're really tested. Boston College has gotten pounded in the market. It's almost down to 14 points. Brady Cook can run. He has the best weapons. Maybe on the slate. I mean, it's right up there with Oregon. With Luther Burden's healthy, which he should be. They just pulled him against a cupcake team to preserve him for the more difficult games. Alan Bowman stinks. The only reason he gets there is sometimes they throw the ball 45 times a game. Gundy and this offense are very receptive to game script, and they were down the entire time against Arkansas. So you saw him throw the ball a million times. Now you have them as 17.5-point favorites against Tulsa. This might be like an Ollie Gordon 40 carry game at the expense of Bowman. So I certainly think Brady Cook is safer than Bowman. He's just a little harder to play because you have to go all the way up and play Burden or play some guys that you're not really that comfortable with. But I do like him. He also is going to be a pivot off like Chalk Nate Noel, which is pretty nice. I just don't think Bowman is talented whatsoever. And this is a game that really sets up for some downside if they run the ball a lot.
One last guy, and then there is a punt option that I want to mention, but I want to ask you, I caught a little of the Texas Tech game last week, and the Washington State quarterback was running wild, not even metaphorically, literally. He had almost 200 yards on the ground. Now he's 8,900. He's in the Apple Cup today. Who is this guy? I don't know a lot about him. Is that where he should be priced? And is the Washington State offense in play today?
I personally don't think he should be priced there. The total in the game is still pretty good, and his rushing floor is obviously great. It's just not going to be 200 yards. Texas Tech had about 18 guys injured in that game. They're playing with like double-digit backups. It's not a joke. That is legitimate. So I don't know. I respect Jed Fish a lot more as a head coach. He should be prepared to face Mateer. I don't know what their offense is going to look like. This is typically, an air raid scheme, but they've played nobody good. So they've just pounded the ball on the ground. I think he's dicey and he's going to be owned a little bit. So I would rather play Brady Cook, who I know is a good player at a cheaper price. I still would probably rather play Mateer over Bowman. But yeah, I certainly prefer Green and Holstein.
Last couple questions I wanted to ask about. You mentioned already Sellers. Is Kirk Francis, who is going to have to play catch up against Oklahoma State, in play? This is a guy that, again, I caught a little of the game against Northwestern State, which is not a real school. Sorry to the Demons. And then I saw them against Arkansas State, and he didn't look nearly as good. How low are you willing to go at quarterback, and is Francis in play?
I don't think Francis is truly in play outside of really large tournaments. Their coach keeps talking about using Cooper Lega in backups. So that's more risk than there should be with him. Normally you could guarantee 100% of the snaps. I'd be just fine with it. Oklahoma State is a terrible defense, but I just don't know if he's going to play all the snaps. So I have 1% of him.
Last thing before we move on from quarterback, and again, chat, we'll save some time at the end for questions. This is all stuff that you can get. We'll talk about the college football offerings here at Stokastic. Fantastic. On FanDuel, can I ask you really quick about Shedeur Sanders and Cole Andrea, some of those guys? I assume them and KJ Jefferson, just looking at the slate over there, are some of the better options.
Good idea bringing up FanDuel. I saved my exposures to FanDuel this week.
Look at this guy.
Yeah, after I messed up last week, I'm ready. But yeah, quarterbacks completely different. Cole Andrea, Jefferson, Billy Edwards, and Shedeur Sanders would be my top 4 over there. None of them are on the DraftKings main slate. Then I would go Garrett Green, Brady Cook.
See, so yeah, definitely a switch over there, and you can just see it. There's some high-octane games. I really like the over in that Colorado game. I talk about that in my premium tails.
Play FanDuel today. It is such a good slate over there. DraftKings stinks. FanDuel has an electric slate.
All right. I'm always down for an electric slate. Before we move to running backs, I already mentioned this, and you guys know all the tools and the products that we're putting out here at Stokastic. The season's two weeks old. If you've been looking for a process and you say you haven't finally nailed it down, come on in. College football, check it out. Use a month of it. We're talking about single lineup center, the Sims, all of Matt's ownership and projections. The team does a fantastic job. It can really help you paint a picture. If you're saying, man, I'm starved for value, you can just simply sort and find the value plays that we're recommending. Really, really simple, really easy way to simplify your process. give it a shot. Again, I really stand behind it. Use it for all different sports. Really, really effective. You talked about quarterbacks, and a lot of them were breaking the bank. So I'm interested to see, as we move to running backs, kind of what you're looking at, what we're looking at, because right off the bat, you've got out Ollie Gordon's $10,000, but then there's a string of 6K backs that also makes sense. So I'll start with Ollie Gordon. Is that the guy? I mean, do we have room in terms of salary to go get him?
I think it's the same thing as Dylan Gabriel, Jalen Milroe. You should set aside a portfolio and then dedicate part of that to Ollie Gordon. He might carry the ball 40 times today, no joke. And there are ways to get to him. We haven't receivers this real, I think, key to the slate because there's so many cheap guys that you can spray at down there that all have roles. They're just not very secure. But I do like spraying at them in order to access the ceilings of the elite players, and Ollie's certainly one of them. No one would be like his rushing prop is like 115 yards today. That doesn't even include receiving. Rushing plus receiving is like 140. That's a guy you definitely want in your lineup. Just base median projections aren't going to give you a ton. They're going to just spray middle plays across the board. And I think all that stems from the expensive quarterbacks. So you basically get like Green, Holstein, and then even to play them, you need to go down at running back. So Ollie kind of gets left for dead. Right now we're projecting about 20-ish% ownership, which is really low for him. I'm trying to come in over the field. Right now I have 30. And again, my approach is just using the value and spraying it to also kind of spray at the expensive studs that I think are going under-owned with this just mega mid-range chalk.
I mean, he's got almost a $2,000 gap between him and the next running back. Most people are either going to choose Gordon or go balanced. I just want to mention this because this guy's not going to be popular just on lineup construction. Do you have any Jordan James in your pool?
A very small amount. It's not a ton, but I would rather, so you know, like you can't play Jordan James and Ollie. I would rather get up to Ollie.
Okay. It seems like the prudent move. Let's get to the spot that most people are most concerned about, which is this kind of 6K running back range. Desmond Reed has been running wild all year. Again, Pittsburgh, credit to them so far. This change has looked pretty good. I'm not the biggest fan of that team, and I did bet West Virginia today, but that doesn't mean that Desmond Reed isn't in a really good spot here. I assume that he would be someone you'd recommend for cash, and I assume that he's going to be the highest owned player on this slate.
Yes to both. No real holes to poke in Desmond Reed. Honestly, his workload could be better because he's been banged up in some games and had to leave the field. And we're talking about a guy that just touched the ball 27 times. 8 of those were targets in their last game. And that's the thing. They throw the ball so much. It doesn't always matter that his carry counts are, 15 and 19. He's on the field for 60% of the routes. He's a great pass catcher. I mean, he was previously in this offense. He came over with the OC. So, I mean, he's been catching balls for years. Now, I respect the West Virginia front a little more than their secondary, but the workload's just too good here. It doesn't really matter. Like, he's priced way more efficiently on FanDuel.
Other backs that, again, we definitely have to hit on would be Jonah Coleman, Darius Taylor. They're all within, $500, give or take, of Reed. Are these pivots, are these combinations, or are these just how people are going to build where they take 2 or 3 of these guys and then they figure out the rest?
That's what people are definitely going to do, and just playing it just spread across the board. The workload for Coleman would have been better if they played competent teams. He's already averaging 115 yards per game. Another guy that has excellent pass catching. He followed the coaching staff over from Arizona. He's also a massive back, very athletic, on the field for a lot of the routes, had 5 targets in the last game. He should push like 20-ish carries here. Matchup is not, it's really hard to evaluate either of these teams efficiency-wise because neither of them have played much. Texas Tech being the best team, but Washington State played a roster of Texas Tech backups, so I don't even respect that. But yeah, they're favored. This game should be, I think, fairly high scoring in the context of the slate, 55.5 total, and Coleman's on the field almost every play.
Let's see who else we got here. Just pulling up projections and ownership. Raheem Sanders, sub 5K. There are some 5K backs. Nate Noel, Jeremiah Love. Are these guys just plays? Does anyone stand out? When you look at this slate, we are starved for value. So maybe a guy like Sanders does get into the mix for South Carolina.
I actually think this is a great area to play for GPPs because you have Darius Taylor coming in at 44% ownership, roughly. I still think he's a good play. He returned to the lineup last week, and then, Minnesota beat the hell out of Rhode Island, so they just let him run 14 times and then took him out. I'm guessing he also had 4 targets, which was very surprising, but I don't know. We'll see if that persists. 18 touches against an FCS team. He should push for 20, but I still have questions on the overall ceiling. I don't think he has like the 35 touch ceiling we saw last year because they went out and added Marcus Major. They added Sabangura. They still have Newbin. And this team collapsed when he got hurt. So I think they're trying to preserve him a little bit. So occasional change of pace touches probably go to some of those guys. It's not a ton of risk, but it's at least something to consider. I don't think it's the same ceiling touch wise as it was last year. And there are a lot of options I like pivoting to. You named a couple of them. Nate Noel is also going to be owned, so it's not him. He is the pass catching back in a timeshare with Marcus Carroll right now, so he's fine for like cash stuff if you need to get to him. But Jeremiah Love against Purdue, this line keeps coming down because of the Riley Leonard injury. The workload for him has actually been a lot better than I thought it would be. And he's handling most of the running back touches. We're talking 41.5%. And that's with Riley Leonard soaking up a lot too. So there's a lot of work on the ground for him. They've been in a couple weird games. If they actually play this to the spread or maybe beyond the spread, open double digits, Love could see like 18 to 20 touches. I think he's an excellent play. I have a lot of interest in some other guys that I think are GPPs in this range. Javante Barnes is just running laps around Sawchuk, who might just absolutely suck. So he's
That hurts.
interesting. Sawchuk is terrible.
What happened to my guy? I love that guy.
He had like one good game and he's been terrible ever since. I don't know what happened to him, but Barnes has been just running laps around him. They're almost 2 touchdown favorites against Tulane. I guess the real concerns are their O-line has collapsed due to injury. Still, it's Tulane. You think that would be okay. I think Caleb Jackson and Josh Williams are really interesting for LSU now that Josh Emery's out of the picture. And South Carolina's run defense is a little suspect. I don't know why LSU hasn't taken a ground and pound approach behind their elite offensive line, but I think there's a chance they start doing that. And that would definitely benefit Jackson and Josh Williams. Those are players I'm trying to be over the field on in GPPs at the expense of some of the chalk we mentioned. And that's a way to differentiate if you do want to play some chalk and then just get like 1 low owned play, 2 low owned plays. That way you can have a similar construction with Green, Holstein, some of the receivers we'll talk about, but then maybe instead of Darius Taylor, you go down and you play like a Love or something, and that can be a great way to differentiate you.
We talked about a bunch of these guys. Anything else? How low? Like, are you entertaining like Maccabee?
I hate Maccabee.
I know you do. I know you do.
He's so bad, and he allegedly gained weight this offseason to like help his performance, which was baffling to me because the guy has like a 4.8 40-yard dash to begin with. Like what in the anyway, Maccabee stinks. You could play him because he's really cheap. It's the only good thing you could possibly say about Maccabee. I'd rather play Wayshawn Parker, but I think there's still going to be a timeshare there. Mateer carries a lot. Schlenbacher still carries a decent amount. We don't know what the pass catching role is just because we don't know what the pass rate's going to be. They might just fully abandon this former air raid. We'll see on that. He's a name worth mentioning. There's a couple other guys that are really cheap. I might throw into lineups as just like really low ownership kind of guys. You mentioned Jordan James is the expensive one. I think he's okay. For cheap guys, I do think the LSU backs are certainly in play.
Anything else on running back? Let's see. We had a couple questions. Hankerson.
Timeshare. And they've just pounded teams. You look at the carries for Oregon State. They've been absolutely bananas because they've been dominating teams. Hankerson went 24-16 in their first 2 games. Jam Griffin went 20-18. Their pass rate is 35%. Now you're 17-point underdogs to Oregon. I mean, this offense, they have a sub 17 team total. I think you're buying high on these guys considering their, FCS opponents and then who they played last week. San Diego State, right? They should have crushed them by more.
Yeah, they played San Diego State, and I bet Oregon State in that game. Let me tell you, it was an indictment of how bad San Diego State was, not how good anything that Oregon State is doing. I hate to be the bearer of bad news, but that's the truth. It really is. Let's move it to FanDuel because I don't see anything else here. Le'Veon Moss or Cam Cook or Rocket Sanders?
Is this a FanDuel specific?
Didn't say it.
Cam Cook is not on the DraftKings main
So maybe
slate,
it is.
but I do like the two other players on DraftKings he mentioned. For FanDuel, I think Cam Cook is the best play out of the players he mentioned. It's just a different price range. Like Rocket Sanders is still a value over there, but he's not. He's like a really good value in DraftKings. I think he's just average on FanDuel. Cam Cook is too cheap. And who was the third person that this person mentioned on FanDuel?
Raheem Sanders.
Who was the other one?
Moss.
Oh, Le'Veon Moss.
Yep.
Le'Veon Moss is on DraftKings. I think he's a solid play. The total net game is just really low, and I think it's largely because of the quarterback stuff. But he had a really good workload against Notre Dame. So I think he's okay for really big tournaments.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but I'd say for the most part, when you look at FanDuel's running backs, they're more analogous to DraftKings than quarterbacks. For the most part, the same big guys from Ollie Gordon to Desmond Reed to Jonah Coleman are up there. Maybe there's a few that I'm not thinking of. I guess you could look to Justin Marshall or someone like that, or RJ Harvey. But what else is there really for FanDuel, or is it more a 1-to-1?
The pricing's a little different, so it's a lot easier to get a stud and then play one cheap running back. And for reference, like Desmond Reed is almost up there with Ollie Gordon on FanDuel, so he is definitely a stud where he's a value on DraftKings instead. I would like to play one of those guys and then pay down, but there's a lot of really good pay down options. Cam Cook, the lead back for TCU, just dominated touches week 1. You have Jordan James at 8,800. He's one of the more expensive backs on DraftKings. He is not that on FanDuel. He's a very good value over there. And Justin Marshall at 5,700. If you need to pay down for somebody, the Colorado State back had an awesome workload in their first game. 25 carries, that was against Texas, and then they played an FCS team in week 2, so they split that backfield. But we've seen them run the ball more, and it's really hard to parse because, they got blown out in their first game, and then they want to blow out in their second game. But Marshall, he was sort of a situational back last year, dealt with some injuries, hyper explosive when he touched the ball, so it's nice to see him in a full workload. They shouldn't be giving anyone else carries in this offense.
Anything else from running back that you want to mention? Again, we'll have time at the end of the show to kind of like a Kobe Pace. That seems like a stretch. ETN.
He's really bad. Kobe Pace sucks. ETN, you're always rolling the Georgia like roulette wheel. You never know with Georgia. If Kentucky plays them close, ETN could carry 20 times. If this plays beyond the spread, he could have 6.
Yeah, that's just kind of where we're at. Let's see. What else do we've got here? Last question. Thoughts on Mario Anderson Jr.? We've seen Florida State, obviously Boston College did whatever they want. Teams have been pushing them around. Memphis, I'm a fan of what they do. I don't really think of them as a potent rushing attack, but do you think he could be in play today?
I got more of him than I thought I would. You outlined this extremely well. The backs that have faced Florida State, none of them have projected particularly well, but none of their games have played to the spread. So if you think Memphis is closer than a 6.5 point favorite or underdog, I would play more of him. But I just have like no read on FSU right now. Their defense has been terrible.
I don't get that.
They're like 127th in defensive efficiency right now. I don't get it either because most of the players return outside of the front 7. Like their secondary is elite, but they haven't been good either. Regardless, go ahead.
No, go. I was just gonna, some of those guys in the secondary are good players, real players, and they've looked terrible.
I know. I agree. It's weird.
It is.
But for Anderson in particular, he's a talented player. He's a South Carolina transfer. He's a little bit smaller, but Florida State's run defense has been bad. They lost Sutton Smith, who was a change of pace. Now your change of pace projects to be some combination of Greg DeRosier, who's a UMass transfer, and Brandon Thomas. The big problem with Brandon Thomas is he's enormous. So at the goal line, he comes in a lot at the expense of a player like Anderson. Touchdown equity is certainly a little lower, which I think is somewhat problematic as a touchdown underdog against Florida State.
Let's move it to wide receiver. I'll say before that, though, and Mike already dropped this in chat. You dropped some player props in your marketplace over on Tails. I've been dropping picks all morning as well, also in the soccer streets. If you bet on sports, if you enjoy it, head over to OddsShopper, click on Tails. You're going to see me. You're going to see Matt. You're going to see all sorts of content creators. It's a fun platform. It's great. You get access to us. You get the ability to really converse with the insider of your choosing. I'm really proud of what we built there. It's brand new. So the links are in the description of this video. I know we're talking DFS, but we would both be happy to answer questions in there anytime, any place. So you got mine and Matt's insider marketplaces there. Did we talk about Johnson from Florida? Not really. That's a weird game, though.
Very weird. There's likely to be movement in the line later in the day too, which would affect his projection certainly. If Wegman's out, like he's going to spike because Florida is probably going to be favored at home. Johnson, I think, is fine for GPPs. I have a decent amount of him right now. Current exposure slightly over the field.
Wide receiver time. And it's the same story. I feel like we've seen, and we'll get to that super chat in just a second, but I feel like we've seen these Oklahoma State wide receivers just be priced towards the top in terms of ownership, from Stribling to Presley. And that game of the ownership right now, it looks like people are all over. Benjamin on the other side should be busy. Is that how you see this slate in terms of the wide receivers?
I think he should be the best slate. He's been dominant early in the year, but they have 3 good receivers. Like, the problem with OK State, it's the same thing we laid out with Bowman. Like, if they just pound Ollie Gordon to the ground, you might be looking at lower opportunity than normal. The thing you can hang your hat on, even if that does happen, is they run a million plays. But with Presley at extreme ownership, I think I would rather just go down and play Stribling or Owens on DraftKings specifically. And there's other expensive receivers that I think you could get to at like 1% ownership. I still have a lot of Presley, but I'm coming in under the field intentionally to try to shave off some of this ownership by playing the the less owned Oklahoma State receivers, and then some of the other studs that are just unowned on this slate.
Probably Poston, appreciate the super chat. Should, and we talked about this at the very top, but I think it is worth repeating. Should Reed be a lock if Wegman is out? Does he supersede West Virginia and Pittsburgh?
But I just don't know how you do it. Like,
say we got the news right now, though, just hypothetically.
Yeah, he runs a lot. He's a very good athlete. The thing you'd probably end up doing, honestly, is like, I don't know, Ollie's in this late slate.
That's what I was going to say. Yeah. The salary you free up,
I would honestly probably, but I don't know who you're playing. You're probably playing, honestly, this probably depends, honestly, how your early slate goes, because there's a lot of afternoon chalk. If Reed plays, I would probably pivot off like Holstein a lot and then take the salary from, like, I don't know, Darius Taylor to try to get up to like an Ollie, or Ollie's in the early slate. You can't go up to him. Sorry. Maybe like a James for Oregon or something like that. I don't know. I played around with this morning. The 2v2s are really hard. Maybe you go to like a stud receiver. I don't know, man. Like, that's the problem with the news. We're not going to get the news, but
I don't think it's going to be a factor, but I could be wrong. We will find out. I think Wegman's going to start.
I think he is too. It's too big of a game, but
yeah,
I don't know. I just don't know what you do with the extra salary.
Wide receivers, back to them. We talked about some of these guys. It looks like, just looking again, you can see all this stuff, our ownership and the projections. There are multiple pay down wide receivers. I'm talking about like 4K guys, Trent Walker, Brennan Thompson, Jaden Smith, a couple of Nevada guys, even though that's a weird game environment. Are these guys getting in the portfolio for you?
Yes, I'm trying to spread more than ownership indicates, though. I guess to kind of break it down, Walker, he is 20 targets through the first 2 games, which is amazing. He's a 50% target share. I just am very hesitant to back someone that has a 2-game sample. And I mean, they've thrown the ball like 26 times total all year, more than that, but like 36 maybe tops. And he's accounted for 50% of those. That's a very outlandish number for Trent Walker. Also just a very tough matchup. This team is a 17 implied team total. So I don't think you should be putting all your chips in that basket. For Oklahoma, they're projected to get back Anderson, and they've been just rolling the dice at receiver anyway. rotating players left and right. Angelo Anthony played in game 1, didn't play in game 2. If he plays in game 3, those snaps are coming directly from guys like Thompson, Reagans. JJ Hester saw his routes cut. If he plays more, that's coming directly at those guys' expense. Petaway has been injured to start the year. He's healthy now. How many snaps does he play? The only player who has a significant, secure role is Deion Burks. Everyone else, I think you can poke holes in. And I still think Thompson is the second most likely to perform in this matchup, but he has concerns, and it's just who are they playing at receiver? Because honestly, none of them are very good. And then who was the third player you mentioned that was cheap?
So I rattled off a couple of guys. I said Trent Walker, Brennan Thompson, and then the two Nevada wide receivers in Braham and Smith.
Oh, Nevada. The only problem with Nevada is they're really run heavy and their team total is super low. With that said, they play 3 wide receivers, the same 3 guys every single play, and those are the only 3 wide receivers that have seen a target this year. So even in that style offense, you have Braham and Smith averaging 7.5 targets per game. They're just not going to leave the field. So maybe you don't have a lot of touchdown equity with this team, but honestly, I bet Nevada. I think this should be much closer than the spread indicates. I wouldn't be like surprised. Would you be terribly surprised if Nevada won?
No, so
that's a bold claim, but I do not think Minnesota's any good.
Not at all. I was just SMU clearly isn't that good. They do a lot of bozo things, but Nevada has shown that they're stepping up little by little. Not to mention, I think we both astutely pointed out that Troy, not it. But I'm okay with Nevada hanging in this game. And what do we really know about Minnesota? Honestly,
we know that they wildly underachieved against North Carolina, and then they beat up on Rhode Island. But I think their quarterback stinks. And their O-line is serious questions, and they're going to try to run the ball 1,000 times, which doesn't help Nevada. Like if they have fewer drives and possessions than normal, it's not good either.
No, it definitely doesn't. But at the same time, you mentioned the concentrated target share is ridiculous on this team. So I get it. There are even further pay down options. A guy like, we didn't really talk about the Memphis passing attack, but like Kobe Drake, 3,800, Bartholomew is 3,800. He's going to be an attachment, I would assume, to some of the Pitts stacks. Are these the cheapest guys you're looking at? I mean, Rigby is the flat min. Is that something you're looking at?
These are the guys I think you want to spray to access Dylan Gabriel, Milroe, and Ollie Gordon, because we flat out don't know what their roles are. They're on the field a lot. And so, like, Purdue's played 1 game. They haven't even played a second game yet. They had a bye.
Idiots.
It's egregious. What does that look like? And, like Kobe Drake, he's the clear wide receiver 3 in Memphis. He has 9 targets this year. That's not great. But Florida State's been a disappointment. For Purdue, the team total is very low, but you're paying the stone min for a guy like Rigby. His route rate was 72%. That led the team. I don't know if he's any good. Who knows? But that's pretty damn solid, and it's worth betting on at the stone minimum. And then there's a few other players in this range. Bartholomew is probably the most secure. He's an attachment to Pitt. He plays almost every play at tight end. I think that's solid. But I wouldn't even just end it there. Like Taz Reddix is an awesome pivot off the Trent Walker chalk. He's on the field like every single play. It's just that 50% of the 18 pass attempts they've thrown this year have gone to Trent Walker. But Reddix, what if this changes in a tiny sample? We briefly mentioned Reagans. He had an awesome route rate with Oklahoma in their second game. Just hyper volatile with Anthony and all these moving parts at wide receiver for that team. Max Clare, the Purdue tight end, is 3,400. He should be on the field almost every single play against Notre Dame. Terrible matchup, and he might split a little more with Bieber than last year. But he's someone that's really cheap that you can use. And there's a ton of these guys. Like Mookie Cooper's 4,200. He's not going to leave the field against Boston College for a Brady Cook-led offense. You could gamble on the Florida State receivers, although I don't recommend it. Like the LSU receivers have players coming back. Even a guy like Jamal Adrian for Purdue is 4,300. He projects to be their number 1. There's a lot of guys. Jerron Tibbs is going to play a lot for Purdue. He's 3,500. There's a lot of players down here. None of them project well, but none of them project poorly. So I like gambling on them.
I wanted to go back to something you talked about earlier in the show when I asked you about some of the potential injury situations. And then we can talk, if you want to talk about like Luke Burden and guys like that. But Do you really care if Wilson plays for Florida? Is that a piece of news that will have repercussions for your lineups, or does it really not matter?
Yeah, he's awesome. He was the first prop I bet this week before the injury news came out. He took over his receiving, and he is going to open up Elijah Badger if he's out, who had a great week too, but Elijah Badger's 4,600. I would presume he's the number one target for this team because they already lost some players like Khalil Jackson and stuff. Some other players you guys don't care about are out, but that matters because you don't have as many players to potentially steal snaps. So I think it's probably consolidated between Badger and Shamir DK, who's also not expensive. And we're going to see both Mertz and Lagway in this game. I honestly don't care who plays. Lagway was great against the FCS team, but Mertz's problem for DFS has nothing to do with his arm. He's great at getting the ball to his pass catchers. It's the sacks he takes where you don't want to play him individually, but it has no negative effect on the actual pass catchers. Mertz had an elite season last year.
No doubt about it. He took care of the ball. It was very, very good. But you mentioned when you start with negative 50, yeah. I just wanted to know if Wilson sat, would someone like Badger become like cash viable? Would he be the preferred target in the 4K range?
I honestly think so. It would be Chris Hudson's really good in the 4K range. Walker, of course, is pretty good with that 40% target share. Thompson's volatile, but I still think he's the second best bet. I do think that Badger jumps the Nevada receivers, probably jumps Thompson, though.
Okay. Good to know. I'm trying to pull that up on the other screen. Apologies. Let's go to FanDuel. Let's see what else we got here, and then we'll take some questions. Again, let's get the likes over 100. That's going to be easy. If you guys are not subscribed to this channel, by the way, we're about to hit 100,000 subs. Don't miss it. You don't want to tell your friends next year when they're like, were you one of the first 100,000? Because I'm sure that's what you guys are talking about on the weekend. And you say, no, I was in the next batch, and then you're shunned from your friend group. Don't be those type of people. Get inside the ropes to be one of the first 100,000. FanDuel, obviously, when we were talking about some of the quarterbacks, it's only natural that some of their wide receivers come with it. And that means that Travis Hunter and Jimmy Horn, and dare I say Wester as well, are just like, is it just you take them, you pair up Sanders and you call it a day over there? And then you mentioned Torrey Horton, who is trying to fight through it. And I'm skeptical as well.
Yeah, Colorado is in a much better spot than normal. Shedeur has some of the same concerns as Mertz from a DFS perspective. I'm not talking talent. He takes a ton of sacks. But fortunately for him, Colorado State's outside the top 110 in pass rush. It kind of makes sense. They did nothing to replace Kamara, their elite edge rusher from last year, who's gone. So he was a one-man wrecking ball for Colorado State. He's gone, and they haven't rushed the passer whatsoever. Now you have a clean pocket, presumably for Shedeur, these elite receivers. And if Hunter's the expensive guy you want to play, no problem with it. He's going to have a dominant target share. If you want to forego Hunter and say play Ollie Gordon, LeJontay Wester and Jimmy Horn are so cheap on this site. Why is LeJontay Wester 6,200? He has like a 95% route rate. It's just unbelievably cheap. So yeah, I think you should play at least one Colorado pass catcher in most lineups. If you're playing like 150 or something, you could get away from it. Otherwise, the other quarterbacks we talked about, bringing their attachments along. Malachi Fields projects really well on this slate. Ty Felton projects really well. One player we didn't really talk about was Josh Hoover. He doesn't run a lot, but he's like a 300-yard factory in the pass game. That's a fun game against UCF. So Savion Williams projects pretty well for this slate. Otherwise, Prather, all the players you would expect from those quarterbacks we mentioned. It's a very different receiver room on that slate.
Anything else, or are we good? Like I said, we got about 10 to 15 minutes left. We're making some pretty good time. Anything else that you want to hit on at wide receiver?
DraftKings, the studs, I think most people are going to forego, when they take this build that is, all right, I don't want to play all mid-range guys, which is what the chalk is. But I think when they do go expensive player and then punt somewhere else, it's not going to be a receiver. I think largely you'll see that with Milroe, Gabriel, Ollie Gordon. But at wide receiver, there are options to do so. And maybe this is just foregoing Brennan Presley, but up at the top, you still have Luther Burden, who's a player we didn't mention, 1.5% ownership. And then Tez Johnson, 8,500. I would certainly prefer Burden, but 1% ownership for Tez Johnson. Kyron Lacey, if you like him, 3% ownership. Deion Burks at 8K 3.1. We already mentioned Eugene Wilson. A lot of that depends on if he plays, but Evan Stewart, one of my favorite plays in the entire slate, 6,800. I personally think Evan Stewart is just straight up better than Tez Johnson. I wouldn't be, like opposed to just flipping their prices. He's a player I actively tried to get a lot of exposure to in lineups. There's some really good receivers that are coming in sub 5% today. Just an insane talent. It's product of the slate, but I think you want to at least try to get some. And you don't need to go crazy. You play, say you're playing 100 lineups. You play 2 with Luther Burden, you're above our projected field.
That is the beautiful thing, because you've mentioned kind of with some of these guys, there's like a lot of guys that you don't trust, but they're in a slate or a price range where you're going to take shots. You have the luxury when you're playing large field tournaments like that to get 8-10% of a bunch of different guys. You don't need to allocate 30% to Stewart or Burden, but you can have them in the field and still have leverage. That's the beautiful thing. And just, Mike was running the sims right on the screen, which is, again, the power of these tools. Fascinating lineups that are simming out really well right now, showcasing that exact thing. Let's get to some questions. Here we go. Just going to start rattling them off. Jeff Williams, first of all, a member for 22 months. That's what I'm talking about. Milrow and Mateer naked, or who do we pair them with them?
Milrow, I think the best option is Ryan Williams, the stud freshman. You're allocating a ton of salary to that stack, so you're going to have to do something interesting punt-wise. And then for Mateer, it's Williams or Hudson for me.
Yeah, looking $4,300 wide receiver on DraftKings. Let's see what we can find for you, my friend.
Play Reagan or some of the punts. Just go all the way down.
Yeah, and you have so many options.
You might end up with a 0, but I do not I think this is a better approach today than most slates.
Always can be live for a 0. We didn't really talk about them. We mentioned Sellers a little bit and Sanders on the other side. Which LSU running back do you prefer?
I prefer Josh Williams.
Okay.
Not by a lot.
Okay. High-priced wide receivers, all really low owned. Yeah, we were just kind of talking about that with Luther Burden and those guys. You don't have to break you have to break the bank a little, but ownership-wise, you don't have to allocate a lot to get over.
No, it's very nice.
FanDuel, Mumpfield or Burden or Presley?
Burden.
Can't go wrong with Burden. And although I like Boston College in that game to cover, I still expect Brady Cook and Burden to get it done. Evan Stewart or Savion Williams?
That's hard. I have a bias towards Evan Stewart. I think I would go him.
Fair enough. Guy Green Mateer, Presley or Bartholomew? I must be not thinking of the right guy. Isn't that
I think there's multiple Presleys on the slate. I'm guessing he means
it can't be the Oklahoma State
Balin
one.
Presley from Tulsa. He's like a gadget player, but he's actually the brother of Brennan Presley, funny enough. I'm sorry, who was the 2v2 again? I heard Presley.
If Bartholomew was the other one. I just didn't think it could be the Oklahoma State Presley because that's like a $3,000 price gap.
Yeah, I would go Bartholomew. It has to be Presley's brother. The brothers play each other today. If you like narratives, it's going to be cool.
Look at that. Again, this just shows why I told you at the beginning of the show. Not all working over here. Is Trent Walker in cash viable? Slim wants to know, friend of the show.
Yeah, I would probably play him in cash.
This is an interesting one. We talked about UCF a little. That's a fascinating game tonight. If you go to KJ Jefferson, is Townsend in play with him?
Yeah, he's a wide receiver too.
Is a double stack of Williams and Bauman with Mensa crazy? Should I start with something different in a GPP? I don't know how.
Depends on how big it is. That's a 2-lane stack. Not crazy if you're playing something large.
And I will say, again, you can play this game all the time. It doesn't always work like that. They were marching up and down the field against Kansas State's secondary, and Fafita didn't have the easiest time last night. I know that game was in the Little Apple and Tulane was at home, but Tulane has shown flashes with Mensa. I don't mind that.
Mensa's way outperformed expectations so far.
Yes, he has. Do you know any? Certainly, this is a question for you more than me. You know anything with the North Texas wide receiver situation? We both bet North Texas. I can tell you that much. I trust I trust Morris at quarterback. What do you know about that situation?
Are they on like the FanDuel early slate or something?
I was about to say, I didn't even know they were on a slate, to be honest.
I usually don't play the early slate on FanDuel. All right, North Texas wide receivers. I know Ragsdale's not playing today for North Texas. That's not good. Damon Ward, he's been at 95% of the routes. DT Sheffield, he's Purdue transfer. His routes dropped a little last week, but he's at 21 targets in 2 games. Those two look like the 2 top plays you want to get to from that. Everything else has been a pretty nasty rotation. The wide receiver 3 is split between Blair Conwright, TCU transfer, and Jeremiah Aaron, and I believe is he from West Virginia? If I'm not mistaken, maybe. I don't know.
Going to be a fascinating game. That's a high total. Holstein or Mateer in DK Cash? I would play Holstein personally.
Same.
Thoughts on Mario Williams' revenge game against OU?
Can you say that again?
Thoughts on Mario Williams for FanDuel today? Let's see.
Yeah, he's great. He's going to be a stud.
Where is he? Yeah, he does great up. Pretty well. Is flat 7. Yeah, not that popular though. Love Montrell Johnson running back.
He's
Love. Okay, I see what they're saying. Got it. Montrell Johnson or Love in terms of a running back.
I would prefer Love. Close though.
Came in late. That's all right. You made it, Dimitri. What's better, DK quarterback, Green or Mateer? It would be Green.
Same.
Rock Taylor and Cam Cook or Justin Marshall and Mario Williams?
Rock Taylor side.
Hey, Jeff Williams. Appreciate that as always. Barnes for OU or Sanders for South Carolina?
Sanders.
Sanders for me as well. You have any feel on that game? I know I'm asking questions now. Chad, I'm sorry to hijack it. What?
I bet the under.
Ooh. Okay. Sheffield versus Ward.
Sheffield.
Feel good about Evan Stewart over on the receptions in terms of yards, 54.5.
Feel okay.
Okay. Any other thoughts? Again, the injury news that we're waiting for, not coming through probably until, later in the day. Anything like that? Double stack Cook with Burden and Cooper for large tournament, or should I single stack and go lower than Cooper?
You can do that. It's fine. Cooper's not expensive.
Yeah, he's just going to be an attachment piece. That'll definitely be a way to be different. No doubt about that. We'll wait if a couple more questions come in, and I do want to say real quick, the last thing for me that's really important that I always like to mention, it's been on the screen, but Bet365. We talked about it briefly earlier in the show, but if you are betting or you just like to get options when you have bonus bets flying out there, if you're in a state with Bet365, they're running Bet 5, get 200. It's very simple. I'll spend 30 seconds on it. If you're in one of those states, not slates, you bet 5, win or lose, you get $200 in bonus bets. The link is below. You take advantage of it, and it can really make the difference. So check it out. You got to be 21 plus, 18 in Kentucky. If you have a gambling problem, call 1-800-GAMBLER. But it makes the difference when you are building a bankroll to take those really good opportunities from these sites when they pop up. If you want to bet college basketball prop alts, look at that. And who doesn't want to do that? All of us want to do that. College basketball.
What are we doing?
What'd you say?
What do we want to do?
Bet college basketball props. Who doesn't want to do that?
Oh yeah, that's fun.
Prather versus Wester.
Prather.
Oklahoma State running or passing game this week. It seems like it's everything, man. Tulsa's defense is awful.
Well said.
Javante Barnes or Sanders. It would be Sanders for me.
Same.
I think we've done it, friends. Sir, you can find Matt at Matt_Gajewski on Twitter. I'll assume you'll be tweeting out news as it breaks. It's a great follow to stay up to date on this stuff. And of course, the ownership and the projections behind the glass. It's a great way to stay up as news breaks. You can find me at JazzRazBets, and you can find both of us, of course, on our marketplace. There's no reason to panic. We have 5 minutes left, but we are going to bounce on out of here momentarily. We'll take the last question from Nate. Best $3,500 wide receiver on DraftKings.
I literally just built a lineup and tried to figure that out. I think I prefer Max Clare for Purdue at the tight end.
Ooh, Max Clare for Purdue at the tight end. What a perfect way to end it. Again, everyone, I appreciate you guys tuning in. We're about to cross 100 likes on the way out here. On that note, let's have a great slate week 3 here at Stokastic. Thanks for tuning in as always, guys. If you have any questions, you can always tweet us as I mentioned. But for me, for Matt, for Mike behind the glass, good luck today. Let's take down some tournaments. Tweet us when you do. And come back next week. Same time, same place.